Good afternoon. This is Hap May with the Legal Play.
And I am Chelsea El-Azzi, Hap's associate. So Hap, today you and I were discussing liens and encumbrances on houses and foreclosure processes.
Correct.
And the issue came up of the IRS having a lien on a house.
Federal tax lien.
A federal tax lien that also has a mortgage on the property.
Correct.
And my understanding is that the mortgage is superior. That the mortgagee, the person that has lent the money,
and that is generally the rule is, basically in most states is first come, first serve. That's what we call a race notice, but it's the race to file the courthouse. So if the mortgage is existing prior to the filing of the tax lien, it will generally be superior.
Okay, but a junior lien holder, someone who has come along later in time and has a lien on the house, can still
after the
mortgage is in place.
After the mortgage is in place.
After the mortgage is in place.
Okay, all right.
Or after anybody who.
Or after whether the mortgage or the tax lien. It's a little different discussion.
Yeah.
Whether it's a second lien mortgage or a mortgage that is inferior to a tax lien.
Okay, I'm gonna come back to that.
That doesn't happen very often.
I'm gonna come back to that.
You can't get title insurance if it's properly recorded.
Federal tax lien
in the county in which the property is located.
Okay. Yes, because generally speaking, the mortgage company or any banks are gonna run title and do their due diligence to make sure they actually want to lend money.
Every once in a while somebody makes a mistake and you get these weird aberrations, but generally speaking, you can't get a mortgage if there's a federal tax lien.
Okay, so usually there's a mortgage on the house and then the federal tax lien comes into place and it's the government says we also have a lien on that house.
Right.
But it is junior, it is subordinate to the mortgagee.
Correct.
The person that holds the mortgage on the house. So then I said, well, okay, the IRS wouldn't be able to do anything if there's the current, mortgage on the house because the bank has superior ownership rights or title to the equity in that house. And you said, not exactly.
Not exactly. There are two things. One, a lot of times the IRS or a federal taxing authority is happy just to put the lien on the property and wait till it sells or somebody needs to refinance. Because then a title company picks up on it and says, okay, before we can sell it to a new buyer, and the new buyer can get a mortgage and all that, we can issue a title policy on it. We got to have that.
You got to pay off.
So they get a hold of the title company, gets a hold of the appropriate party with the IRS, and there is somebody who does nothing but that in most IRS districts. That just basically says, here's what's up, here's what the payoff is. Here's the amount of the tax lien, and it's good for 30 days or something like that, and sets up the procedure whereby the title company couriers them a certified check, and they take the check and they stamp the release and they give it back to the courier or send it over to the title company so that the federal lien can be released.
That's if you're trying to sell the house or refinance.
Or just pay it off.
Yeah, right.
But through some mechanism, through sale, refinance, or just you have some money, you want to pay it off.
Okay, but in certain cases, there's the house, there's an existing mortgage on it, the federal tax lien comes in. Can the IRS foreclose?
And the answer to that is yes. There's some procedural items or protections that they have to go through in the process, but yes, the IRS can foreclose, take a federal tax lien and foreclose.
Is that common?
It's not real common, but it does happen.
Okay. So what's the process that the government would have to follow, the IRS would have to follow to foreclose?
The government basically gives notice.
How does that? What does that?
First, they will to the notice of tax lien, and then they'll have some intent letters they send to the taxpayer in the process. If they don't get an answer, don't get a satisfactory answer with regard to that, then there's a public notification on such and such a date. you know, the government's interest in this property. And we're using houses. A lot of times it's probably more common to see, you know, office buildings or commercial properties,
Okay,
because those typically are businesses that have more value and bigger IRS debts.
okay,
But it could be a house. And I think most people would understand what the example, if we use a house, is. But so they're going to sell. The government is going to sell their interest in your house. And if you don't do something to stop them, and we'll get back to what might stop them, but if you don't do something to stop them, then they will foreclose. They will conduct the sale. They will issue a special kind of deed. There is a right of redemption where the taxpayer has, I believe it's 6 months, to come back and pay the amount the property sold for plus a redemption premium, which I want to say is 20%, but we might want to look that up. So if somebody bids $100, I think within 6 months, the taxpayer can pay them something like 120 and redeem the property. If they don't, then they have to surrender possession of the property. And the person who bought the property at auction will be the owner. Now, he will be subject to the first mortgage. So he's either going to have to pay off or figure out some other way to satisfy, maybe to continue to make payments if the mortgage company is willing to accept them.
willing to say, okay, so does the mortgage company have to be notified of this foreclosure sale and who the buyer and new
I don't
property
believe they
owner?
have to be notified. However, most sophisticated mortgage companies and banks have people that do nothing but look for those federal notices
Okay,
and match them up with the properties that are secured by the
can
notice.
they intervene and say, no, we don't want that buyer, don't sell to this guy?
They can, well, no, they can't do that,
But they
but
could.
they can start their own foreclosure. So the first lien holder could foreclose. You know, because generally speaking, most deeds of trust will say that a additional lien, including a federal tax lien on the property, constitutes a default on the first lien mortgage. So they would then be able to foreclose.
This sounds like it could get messy.
It does. That's why there are lawyers.
Okay. Okay, so there's the process that the IRS has to follow to foreclose, and there's
And there is some upper level procedure. Used to be the district manager had to sign off before they actually conduct a foreclosure sale. I'm not sure if that's the person anymore, or there's some other person designated for approval. But it takes somebody fairly high up in the process. It's not something your typical revenue officer can just do on their own in the process.
so then how can you keep the IRS from foreclosing on a federal tax lien?
One is pay the lien.
Okay.
Two is enter into some sort of installment agreement that that makes payments to prevent and offer and compromise.
You mean prevents the lien from being put in place?
Put it not well. One the lien to be put in place, and if you can stay current, get into an installment agreement that prevents the tax liens from getting in place. That's good. Sometimes that doesn't happen, and the lien is placed on the property because the IRS wants to protect its interest. They may say, okay, you've got some equity in your house, you know, and I know you can't pay us all now, but we don't want you to sell the house and skip the country. So therefore, we're going to place a lien on the property, and then we'll work out a payment plan. So you can work out a payment plan. You can do an offer and compromise, do an installment agreement while there's a tax lien in place. Nothing stopping that. Now, you don't want a tax lien. There's one that, but the tax lien is the first kind of thing that hits the public record. So all your creditors, credit reporting agencies will all know that there's a federal tax lien that they otherwise would not know if you just owed the IRS money and wasn't able to pay it all and are trying to work things out without the existence of a federal tax lien. And just for a little background, federal tax lien is filed in the county in which the debtor has property, it theoretically puts a lien on all of the property that the taxpayer has in that county. Personal property, real property, doesn't matter, homestead's a state law concept. There's a supremacy clause in the Constitution, federal lien trumps even, a state law homestead right. So in federal liens are to be taken seriously. They have a 10-year life. I have had examples of clients that have waited out the 10 years. The IRS goes by without foreclosing on their house, and then the IRS releases the lien. The IRS has 10 years to either collect that debt or reduce it to judgment. I think there are only 2 cases in my life where they've actually gone to the process of suing to get a judgment so their lien didn't expire. And in those 2 cases, one taxpayer owed $50 million. In the other case, the taxpayer owed $105 million.
Okay.
So I typically, if you owe the IRS a couple $100,000 and they have a tax lien, and they don't foreclose, which a lot of times they won't for numbers like that on a house.
It's a cost benefit analysis.
You might be able to wait out the 10-year process.
They're gonna look at what's gonna be, time and costly for them to have to pursue.
But in the meantime, you can't sell the house, you can't refinance the house. But if you're gonna live there another 10 years, and the IRS isn't collecting otherwise, that sometimes that happens.
Will a mortgage company potentially catch wind of a newly filed federal tax lien?
Yes.
And what might they do if they find it out?
Well, here's kind of the general rule, not necessarily the law, but the general rule of what happens like that. I mean, big banks and mortgage companies either have their own shop or subscribe to a service that keeps up with who has federal tax liens, so they can match it to the owners of properties they have loans on. I mean, that's out there. And so they in all likelihood will find out. But generally, if there is no other default, I mean, that is technically a default.
You mean you're staying current on your payments?
You're staying current on your payments. You're making sure you got insurance, taxes are paid. You're giving the mortgage company or their servicing agent all the information on taxes and the like. Then generally speaking, most banks will just sit back and take the money. But if you have a federal tax lien, they may be a little stricter if you're in default. I mean, sometimes homeowners can fall 30, 60 days behind. Generally speaking, they can catch up without much consequence. If you got a federal tax lien, the lender may be a little more strict because they realize there's a little more risk, because people who have $200,000 of equity in their house will generally make sure that their mortgage gets paid so they don't lose their equity. But people who have basically no equity because they have a mortgage and then second liens, including tax liens behind it, their attitude toward here are the keys, it puts the property at greater risk of default in the process, and the bank doesn't want to get the property back, even though they're probably well covered and can take it and have somebody fix it up and put it on the market and sell it and maybe not get full dollar for it, but get enough to pay their mortgage. They don't want to go through that administrative process. They're in the business of lending money and getting money back, and they want to get money back. They don't want to get property back.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, I mean, that was my basic question that inspired this podcast, was just the process of the IRS foreclosing on a federal tax lien that was specifically junior to an existing mortgage.
Right, and sometimes they won't do that. Sometimes there's not enough equity in it for them to do that. If you've got a $300,000 house with a $240,000 mortgage and $60,000 tax lien on it, there's not enough equity. Generally speaking, the IRS uses what I call the 80% rule, and that's specifically in their regulations and guidelines. Is they're looking to get, the IRS is looking to get 80% of the value of the house. So if you had a paid for $100,000 house, the IRS, generally speaking, will allow you to sell it or refinance it and get $80,000.
Oh.
If
Okay.
if you take that same example, you have a
Okay.
$100,000 house with a $50,000 first mortgage, $80,000 is what they're, $80,000 house, so 80,000 would be $80,000 minus 50. They're looking to get 30.
Okay. Okay.
And I've put together deals, based on that.
And federal tax liens don't just attach to real property, right?
Attached to everything the uh, tax owner owns within that county. And generally speaking, it's not a very effective lien for the IRS when it comes to a lot of personal property. I mean, if I'm moving and I sell my couch to my neighbor, even though I may have a federal tax lien on it, the neighbor doesn't look to see if I have a federal tax lien. And the IRS is not going to come and go back to my neighbor's house and say, give me, there's a lien on that, we're going to foreclose it, but with big companies that have $1 million of equipment.
Okay.
And
Yes.
if I'm going to go into your factory and I'm going to buy, $10 million worth of equipment from you, I'm going to look and see if you got a federal tax.
Yes, that would make sense to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some process. So then same with inventory and some other commercial assets more commonly we get that. Now, having said that, you're in law in your living room.
Okay.
If I'm going to buy that from you, and pay, $30
Oh,
million.
Renoir, the painting.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
The
yes.
artist. Okay.
Yeah,
Got it.
yes. So then I might want to look at the federal tax lien because the IRS may come after that picture on my wall, which I would like to avoid having the IRS come and get it. But typically household furnishings, is not something. I mean, theoretically it's covered by an IRS lien, but as a practical matter, that's not what anybody's looking for. They're looking for stuff that has real value that they can sell, and that the administrative process of seizing and selling will actually net them some profit.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Hap, for the information.
All right, this is Hap May with a Legal Play.